You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. I have Dr. Sam Rodgers. He's the medical director for Medichecks. Website is Medichecks, plural, Medichecks.com. So, Dr. Rodgers, aka Sam, thanks for coming. How you doing?
Oh, you're welcome, Richard. Thanks very much for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, so tell me the premise of Medichecks.
So Medichecks it's a direct consumer blood testing company. We've been going for 17 years in the UK, so we're the longest established and the largest as well. And we essentially give consumers the chance to order a blood test to answer a health question that they might be worried about, for that kit to arrive at their home. They've got the option of taking the sample at home with either a finger prick sample or doing a venous blood test, so like a standard blood test you'd have at the doctor's, at one of hundreds of high street locations that we have through our partner clinics. And then they get the results online with a doctor's report at the end of it. That's kind of the essence of the service.
Well, it's surprising that you guys do this in the UK, because with the National Health Service, I again, it's my assumption, but I would think that most people just rely on the government healthcare and don't do their own testing, or don't want to do their own testing.
So there's the majority are still doing that. The NHS is an interesting one. So it's free at the point of care, which is great, and it does amazing things. The problem with the NHS is the waiting times currently are quite long to see a doctor. I work as a GP, so a family doctor in South London, and for me it's about a 3-week wait to see me.
How long was it?
3 weeks potentially. So a 2 to 3 week wait is not unusual just to see your family doctor. So for people who are worried about symptoms, the service we offer is a great opportunity to get some answers before you see your doctor, so you can go with a clearer idea about what the issues may be. If I rewind 10 years in my career, people would come into me saying, "Doctor, I've been Googling. I'm really worried that I've got this particular condition." I would do a blood test. I would bring them back 2 to 3 weeks later and go through the results with them. And for people with health concerns, our service is a chance to go with some of those answers already prepared for the doctor. And it's not just a disease-focused service. We're also very interested in helping people optimize themselves, and that comes in various forms. We've got a lot of athletes who use us, who are looking for the kind of incremental gains they'll get from supplementing, say, iron or vitamin D for their performance, through to people who just kind of want to feel great in their daily life, sort of full of energy and positive about life through uncovering sort of minor abnormalities that they can correct.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, does a doctor have to say, okay, you're allowed to get these tests? Because in the U.S., I've seen a lot of doctors are like, "Oh, you don't need that. Oh, why would you want to test that?" And they just won't do it. They won't send the lab, slip in. It's not just from me, but from friends and all that, other people I know. So do these require a doctor's blessing or no?
It doesn't, no. So that you don't require that to perform a blood test in the UK. So that's interesting. I'm intrigued there. In the States, this is when you're self-paying. A doctor might say you don't need that, and they won't put in the request.
No, I mean on insurance for sure. Then they've got to, the insurance may say no, we don't, it's not necessary. But even self-pay, yeah,
They're like, oh, no, you don't need that. Why would you want to do that for? Oh, we don't test for that, So
That's
you
an
have
interesting
to,
one, isn't it? Because people might be curious about a particular marker, and there are a variety of. I mean, it's not just testing your own blood. It's not just about uncovering disease. People may be genuinely curious about particular markers, and we give those people with that curiosity an option to do that here.
It sounds simple, it sounds logical, but unfortunately, that's what goes on. And then I don't know if you can even address this, but then when different labs have different ranges for different things, so a lot of times doctors here will be like, "Oh, you're in range," and the person may feel awful, and they feel like they're having all these symptoms, but the doctor says, "Well, you're in range, so you're fine."
So
I don't know if you get into that, but
So we try not to. I mean, it's you can treat the numbers, or you can treat the person, or you can do a combination of both. So I mean, the question about reference ranges differing between laboratories is an interesting one. As long as you interpret the result relative to its range, you can kind of compare between laboratories, and we do a couple of things on our platform that allow people to have results from different laboratories and be able to compare them. In terms of deciding what's an optimal position within range versus a simple normal or abnormal, i.e. being in or out of range, we do kind of scan the scientific literature, and we're looking to give people guidance where even if their result is normal, it might be sitting below a level where it could start to cause symptoms. And one example of that, so we have a lot of elite athletes. We've got a couple of pro cycling teams who use us. And for taking the example of iron, if you've got a level below about 75 for ferritin, which is still within the normal range, you will find athletic performance can start to drop off. So we would be advising those athletes to try and keep their ferritin above the level of 75 for optimal performance. Similarly for thyroid, and actually that was an example I wanted to bring up in the UK. The number of blood tests that thyroid patients are able to access on the NHS is pretty limited for routine care. Clinically, you don't need to do more than those markers, but many of those people with thyroid conditions are curious about those levels, and there's certainly a subgroup where checking more than just the standard TSH and T4 can be useful. When you look at the treatment targets that are suggested, so there's a tendency with thyroid with an underactive thyroid, you give levothyroxine, and some doctors will keep the TSH within the normal range, but not consider the position of the TSH level within that range, and people can still feel pretty awful in some cases. And if you aim for the lower half of the normal range, then some studies will show that people feel better if you do that. So yeah, we try to avoid the trap of just looking at the reference range and saying, well, you're normal. We try to look at the individual as well and listen to the symptoms that they're describing.
So do you have a subscription plan where, let's say, someone wants to do a full panel, 8 tubes of blood, 100 something markers, and every 6 months look at it?
So we don't currently. So we do get people who use us repeatedly. We are looking at the options for a subscription package, and some of our competitors are going down that route. The frequency of testing. So I think some services that operate probably suggest testing a little bit too frequently. I think from a customer perspective, if you're testing every 3 months, there's a danger that, first of all, you end up with very sore fingers from testing repeatedly, but also you don't see much change over a 3-month cycle unless you're actually trying to correct something. So for us currently, it's a very much a sort of pay-as-you-go, purchase-as-you-need kind of service, but we are looking at the options for subscriptions.
Yeah, well, what if someone wants one marker out of a whole panel, and if they don't do the whole panel, they may be missing or misdiagnosing or freaking out about something that maybe shouldn't be freaked out about,
Yeah. So that's something we want to avoid, and we're working through it. So our most popular panels, we've got sort of 2 broad groups. So we've got groups of tests that have been designed by us for consumers to use. And in those panels, we try to assemble all of the markers that are needed to form the complete picture of what's going on. And going back to iron, in the past we had checked some iron markers in isolation, and nowadays we try to check all of the relevant iron markers plus the inflammatory markers when there's inflammation in the body. Ferritin in particular can be increased by that artificially, giving a sort of false picture of an elevated iron. So with those tests, we do try to provide the complete package so that people aren't left with sort of incorrect conclusions that they're drawing from it, and so that our doctors have got everything they need to interpret those results.
Yeah, one thing I found helpful is I get my blood work done every 6 months, and I put it all into like Excel. I get the lab reports, but they're just sitting there in isolation. So I graphed it in Excel, and you can see trends and all that, and seems to be more helpful that way. That's why I asked you if you have a subscription package for people.
Yeah, so we do. So in terms of tracking, we offer that. We've got some great trend graphs that people can use, and every marker that people test on our dashboard is presented both with the doctor's comments, but also with background information about that marker, what high levels mean, what low levels can mean, what people can do to improve them. So we're really keen that people are able to track their levels. Certainly, it's we don't see using Medichecks as a one-time event. We kind of want people to get the benefits that come from long-term tracking.
So what kind of comments do you give? What are some examples of things that the doctor on staff comments on?
So we're not a service that offers diagnosis and management of long-term disease. So it's not the right forum to deliver that. So if we encounter signs that suggest illness, we will be directing people back to their doctors. But we're really interested in the lifestyle measures that people can take to improve risk factors. So if we can see someone is drifting towards pre-diabetes or diabetes, then we'll be giving them advice on how to avoid that happening. So you can watch the HbA1c blood test, and if you can see that is sort of heading inevitably towards diabetic territory, you can help people to turn it around before they get there. If we see that someone is low in vitamin D, which is really common in the UK, our lovely weather is to blame for that. We don't get much sun, and we don't eat much fish either. So oily fish is the only other decent source of vitamin D. So in that case, we'll be advising people about the sources of vitamin D. We like to take into account people's dietary habits. I don't know how it is in the States. There's a lot of people in the UK now going vegetarian and vegan. So with our advice, we'll try to tailor it to their needs. Vitamin D sources, mushrooms aren't a bad source. So that's an example of some vitamin D advice we might give to a vegan. And you can get vegan supplements now for vitamin D as well. So we tend to signpost people to their doctors appropriately, where we see lifestyle factors, and it might be, so we might see things that come up on the results, or we might see lifestyle factors in the questionnaires that people complete prior to having their test. We will try to guide people towards a sort of healthier, happier life by correcting those issues.
What about people that are taking medications that may deplete certain levels? Like if you take metformin, legend has it, you got to watch your B12 and supplement with it.
That's right.
Do you have any programs where if someone's on medication, you'll tell them, hey, you might want to check these levels to make sure it's not, killing them?
Currently, we rely on our doctors to spot that. So we collect medication history as part of the test process, and our doctors are presented with all that information as they're interpreting. We are in the early stages of exploring how we can use AI to augment that. I sort of hesitate to say AI will ever replace doctors, but I think it can certainly augment their diagnostic skills. Certainly, I in my general practice, I get 10 minutes with each patient, and I would love to have a little robotic friend sat on my shoulder, sort of saying, "Hey, did you spot the metformin and the low B12 or whatever it may be?" So yeah, going back to your original question, with the medication, we rely on the doctors identifying the fact that they're taking medication and the linkage with the changes we see on the results. We are looking at ways of augmenting that currently.
Well, it seems like you could partner with pharmacists, and they have a database where they cross-check for, interactions between medications. But, this to me, and I'm just speculating, but this sounds like a good accompaniment to anyone taking medication or medications. A lot of people, either they have symptoms or they don't, but they may not know that levels are changing because of medications or medical interactions. This seems to be like a good, checkup system where you're also looking at this. Maybe you're having pharmacists look and say, hey, we should watch these levels, and then making recommendations to people somehow, or saying, hey, ask your doctor about XYZ.
So that's one of my pet projects is looking at whether it's actually my particular interest is in people who are taking quite dangerous medications. So things like immunosuppressant medications, and often they need really frequent monitoring, which can be pretty tiring if you're trying to hold a full-time job down and you've got to go to the hospital every couple of weeks. So whether we could be helping those individuals to monitor their therapy, that's something we'd obviously want to do in partnership with the doctor who's providing them their care. But we'd certainly provide a much more convenient way of monitoring potentially hazardous medications.
Yeah, just an idea I had, but it sounds like you had the same idea, so that's great.
Sorry.
What's your overarching goal with this? You've been doing it for a long time. What got you into it, and why do you keep doing it today? What do you get out of doing it personally? So not money, but personally, why do you do it?
Why do I do it? Okay. So if we go back to, I think probably the first week after I qualified as a doctor, and it was around about the year 2000. So, we're sort of early days of electronic health records, but the hospital I qualified into was trialing one of the very early systems from Cerner at the time, which held so much potential. I looked at this thing and thought, God, this could be amazing. And yet I was still every day on the ward round, frantically scribbling in paper notes and, just recording reams and reams of information, which a computer would do an amazing job of filtering, searching, recalling, giving me the intelligence from it. And yet it was all locked away on paper notes. And I sort of looked at these inefficiencies that we had and thought that there has to be a better way of doing it. So I've always had my finger in a health informatics pie somewhere along the line, be it trying to share records. So I've got a background prior to our national summary care record at a local level of trying to share data between general practice and hospitals. And then so in terms of Medichecks, I just finished a very busy NHS job, and I was working as a freelance locum doctor at the time. And the agency I was working for said, "Hey, there's these guys do online blood testing," and I had the same reaction which many people have when they hear about what we do, which is, "Oh, I didn't know you could do that." And my interest was piqued, and I started working for them initially just as a reporting doctor. Really liked the company culture. I like the team. I like the ethos. So, we're really about empowering people to take ownership over their health data. I don't know how it is. I mean, it sounds like in the States, you're probably ahead of us. If you're used to the idea that you collect your result data and you put it in a spreadsheet, that was still quite a rare activity here. And there was this idea that you weren't.
I mean, it's worldwide, but there's biohackers. There's people. It depends what you're interested in, but there's biohackers that track everything. I mean, Fitbit, for instance, is a small manifestation of that, or Oura Ring. But this is just yet another way to track what's going on with you. And like you mentioned, for athletes, if I'm an athlete, I'd like to subscribe to your program where I know that you're going to check all the levels necessary to keep my athletic performance at peak. And I'm going to do it every so often. So I'm going to make sure that I'm supplementing properly or doing what I can properly to make sure I'm successful at what I do. Or if I'm managing a chronic condition, again, you could have a program where you say, well, looks like science says you monitor these 8 parameters and they're important with cancer. And we're going to do the tests every few months to make sure you're keeping these levels right. And that'll give you the best chance better chance of fighting it, And it seems like there's only silos in which you could help people.
There are, and that's something that struck me quite strongly about the business when I first started working for them. Is we have several very distinct groups who use us. We've got People who haven't got anything wrong with them, but maybe they just want like an annual health check, or every 6 months they want to check in on things, nudge things back into line where they're starting to slide. We've got a lot of people with underactive thyroid conditions who will use us either to sense check their NHS blood tests. In some cases, people are quite frustrated by NHS care, so they're actually some people will actually self-manage. We are trying to direct them back to their doctor where we become aware of that. We've got the athletes that I've mentioned. A lot of weightlifters use us. So yeah, a pretty diverse range of people who are using us for different reasons. And that, I mean, that's quite challenging to a doctor. I train the doctors up before they start reporting for us, because you're sort of leaping between groups with very distinct reporting needs. And that it's another area where we want to use technology to augment the doctors, is in understanding people's motivation for testing. So, you know, what kind of report do they want at the end of the day? And in terms of suggesting to the doctors ways in which they could tailor that report to better meet that person's needs. Currently, we do it in it's a sort of halfway house where we've got some software that expands text snippets, so that according to whether someone's wanting a sports blood test or a regular health blood test, the doctors can pull up guidance for those people that's appropriate to the reason they're testing. But we'd like it to the doctors to be able to focus on their writing and tailoring that report to the individual more than simply commenting on the result.
Yeah, I mean, I did see you working with NHS doctors. You know, if it takes weeks to get in, what probably people should do is, you know, if you were partnered with NHS and let's say someone's going in with a possible thyroid problem, before they get to the NHS doctor, they should go see you, and you do the whole battery of thyroid tests. So when the NHS doctor sees them, they're ready. They don't have to see them and say, oh, well, let's go test this, and then another 3 weeks go by until they come back, and then better to reverse it and speed this stuff up.
I would love that in my NHS practice. I mean, I do. Someone will have waited three weeks to see me. I give them a form for some blood tests. I know it's going to be another 3 weeks until I can act on those potentially. You know, if there's nothing urgent on there, but they need something to help them, and that's a heck of a long time to wait if you're feeling unwell. 6 weeks of, you know, really feeling under par. So yeah, that's kind of my dream is we could augment what happens on the NHS. It's a difficult one here in the UK because it is. I mean, there is quite a clear distinction between the NHS and between private healthcare. So you kind of either it's something that has to exist wholeheartedly within the NHS, or it has to sit outside it. So yeah, I'd love to pilot an idea like that somewhere.
Well, how do doctors perceive you? NHS and non-NHS, you know, private care doctors. Do they see you as a nuisance, or do they welcome you? Like, what kind of reactions have you gotten?
You've just described the two major reactions we get. It's pretty evenly split. So people, I mean, you know, if you're the kind of doctor who is into the idea that it's okay for people to take ownership over parts of their healthcare, then and you know, you can recognize that we sell tests in a responsible way and interpret them in a responsible way as well, then we're not scary and we're not annoying. But there are, you know, we do get the other reaction as well, which is why are you providing these people with tests? Surely you're just overloading the NHS. Having said that, I have only ever had, I think, 2 complaints from doctors in all my time at Medichecks, which I think is testament to the good job that we do on the reports that we provide to people. So yeah,
do you see that private pay versus NHS people are a different species? You know, like I would think private pay are much more willing to pay for these lab tests, and NHS people say, well, why doesn't NHS cover them? And why do I have to do this stuff? I would think. I don't know.
In terms of the doctors or our customers?
No, the patients themselves, the people themselves.
So I mean, everyone using us will have made a decision to source private blood tests. And the interesting thing about healthcare in the UK is almost everyone has a touch point with the NHS on a sort of reasonably regular basis. Partly because, I mean, if you're going to go to see a consultant and you're going to use private care, you will still need a letter from your NHS GP if you're claiming that on insurance. So it's, yeah, are they different? I don't know that they are particularly. I mean, for one thing, I'm not aware of whether people are going on to use exclusively private care or whether they're using NHS. So maybe I just don't notice it. We treat everyone, with the same level of respect, and they put in the same amount of effort into interpretation.
Yeah, it's not a lack of respect, but if you started asking the question of all your people that do the blood tests, oh, are you on NHS or is this private? Do you use private care? That may, I think that might give you a clear signal on the differences in those two types of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly something we could look at in terms of research, potentially.
Yeah, something to think about, So, more mundane questions. How many tests can you do?
So we've been shrinking it a bit. We originally, so if you go back 17 years ago, our founder put the entire test catalogue for a laboratory online. This was around about actually the time I qualified as a doctor, and at the time his mother was running a health screening clinic, and he had this brainwave in the sort of early days of the internet of, hey, why don't we sell these blood tests? So it was the full test catalogue, and I think at peak there were probably about 2,000 different tests on there.
Wow.
It's a lot, and to be honest with you, it's probably slightly too much that, because there were some really exotic tests within there, which had the potential to cause confusion. So we've been sort of pruning our test catalogue down to be the things that people are really going to get useful information out of. So it's not going to be a test that's going to cause them confusion. It's going to be a test that we have the expertise within our reporting team to handle, and they will get useful, actionable insights out of it at the end of it. Don't get me wrong, we still provide several hundred different tests, and there are people who will have a very specific health question that they want to answer, and we've seen quite a few sort of rare and easily missed conditions picked up by people choosing to test themselves over the years. So we don't want to restrict the catalogue too much.
Yeah. Have you guinea pigged yourself and done like every test imaginable? Have you tried that?
I'm sorry, on me?
Yeah.
No, I don't actually. Personally, I mean, my health is pretty good. I think my major issue is my vitamin D tends to run very low. So sometimes I will test to confirm that. I'm quite sedentary in my working life, so I'm becoming progressively more kind of chair shaped as I get older. And I like to keep an eye on my cholesterol and HbA1c levels. I'm 45, so I'm sort of intrigued by testosterone levels, etc. They can start to decline as men get a bit older. But I don't test everything myself. I've met a lot of people. It's interesting you talking about biohackers earlier. I was lucky enough to go to the Strata RX conference when it was running in the States. I met I can't remember her name now. So a professor from, I think it's MIT, and she was kind of one of the first biohackers and trackers, and she'd pretty much hacked together her own monitoring equipment for keeping an eye on blood pressure and blood markers. And for her, so she had a real incentive to want to test, which was she just kept getting really, really ill for hours to days at a time, and finally narrowed it down to eating actually tomatoes and other members of that plant family, which are interestingly the deadly nightshade family. So for her, there was a motivation to test absolutely everything because there was this unanswered health question. For me, I kind of test what I think needs testing.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So what's the future of this for you? What do you hope to accomplish in the next year or maybe the next 5 years? What's your dream?
So, well, I've mentioned the AI augmentation of reporting. That's definitely in there. I want to start partnering with the NHS to provide services, be it at-home blood testing for people who it's difficult to get out or get to a phlebotomy clinic. We have this NHS health check program here where people are offered a cholesterol, HbA1c, and a blood pressure test. That would be brilliant to work with the NHS on. I would like to move from our reporting portal being something that people can use to track their results to something they can use to guide healthy behaviors. So, part of that will obviously be reviewing your blood results, but actually we can tailor advice to the individual based upon the blood results and the lifestyle behaviors that they've told us about.
What about, that's one thing I forgot to ask you. What about all the data? Do you pseudonymize it and look at trends in the aggregate? Are you seeing any of that kind of stuff?
Yes, we are. So we're in our terms and conditions, we ask people if we can use it for research, and internally we've been very interested in the effects of diet. So we were looking at what effects a vegan diet has upon biomarkers. And Helen Marsden, one of our founders, is vegan herself. So we, as a company, have a particular interest in this. And we found that for vegans, they are less likely to have a high HbA1c level, so they're a little bit less likely to be diabetic. They do a brilliant job of keeping their iron, their vitamin D at healthy levels. But vitamin B12, which you can really only get through essentially animal sources in the diet, tends to run low. So that's one example of research that we've been doing. We also partner with organisations to run research, and we've got Dr. Daniel Grant, one of our doctors, has been working with Watford Football Club, actually looking at men with a similar health issue to me, which is sort of middle age, getting a little bit more overweight, and they use football to try and motivate them to get fitter. But then we looked at the effect of monitoring biomarkers on that, and whether they had better results or not. So yeah, we've got a real interest in research. There's a couple of other things we got bubbling, which I can't talk about yet, but which I'm really excited about on the research front.
Are you seeing any aggregate trends in people's blood work over the years?
Through monitoring with us, so at an individual level, it's statistically I'm on shaky ground here, but we do so where people join the service and we find an abnormality. Usually, it's really sort of vitamin levels, nutrient levels that we were looking at. They revert to normal levels if they monitor with us. There's a trend towards that. Now, a statistician would argue that's regression to the mean. So it's a little bit hard to be confident about that finding. But I was quite struck by it in the data when I looked at it, and it's an area that I want to. Once I can find a powerful statistician, I want to do some more work on.
Yeah, you could also help test the efficacy of various vitamins and supplements. You could partner with a supplement company and say, all right, we're going to test your vitamin B12 supplement, see if it really reflects in the serum levels of people over a 1 month course. So I think that you could assist in doing these trials.
We're getting some interest about that, in fact. So it's interesting you raised that. There are. That's something I don't know how it is in the States. Here, over the past 1 to 2 years, we've seen the multivitamin industry being disrupted, which I never imagined would be a thing. But there are sort of internet-based multivitamin suppliers now who are, and they're a lot more open-minded to doing that. If you look back at the kind of old box on shelf type multivitamin sellers, I don't get the impression that there was a lot of research into whether they genuinely help to raise levels or make people feel better. But with the new breed, we have been getting people asking us about that.
Yeah, okay. These are things that come to mind, but I guess you're in a good place to work with a lot of different companies and organizations should they be wise enough to do so.
Yeah, so that is we're almost a bit spoiled on that front. It's really hard to know which projects to follow, because there's a danger we just overload ourselves with trying to do absolutely everything. And there's so many exciting proposals out there that we have to pick and choose a bit where we choose to focus our energies.
Last question too. Do you know anything about the Theranos scandal?
I was waiting for that question.
You'd have a funny perspective. Like, the ridiculousness of what was proposed, you'd probably know intimately,
So, well, I mean, that's the thing. I can remember, I remember the buzz around Theranos and looking at it and thinking from a statistical perspective, that's fundamentally impossible that you can get that level of precision with a tiny volume of blood, because as you shrink the sample size and you try to extract more markers from it, the level of uncertainty around each measurement just goes up and up. So it's it was a fantastic kind of Wizard of Oz act that they had going there. But I think there were a lot of people looking on and just thinking that cannot work. That's magic. That's the only way you can do it. So I want to very quickly follow that up with a reassurance that we are not doing any kind of custom technology for that. We actually use it's pediatric blood tubes, pediatric capillary blood samplers. So these are sort of tried and tested methods for blood sampling. The volume of sample we need is larger than Theranos we're using, and we're really careful about making sure we've got the volumes we need. So the laboratories we use sort of latest generation Roche analyzers, which are very sort of industry standard. But yeah, Theranos was fascinating. I loved the book, the Bad Blood book.
I read it. It was pretty good.
Yeah, there's just a beautiful descriptions in there of this crazy gadget they'd created with a little robotic arm in it that was sort of trying to miniaturize a path lab. So yeah,
I didn't think for a moment that you would do that stuff. I just thought that you'd have an interesting perspective because of the like being in the industry you're in. You more than almost anybody would know how ridiculous the premise was with 1 or 2 drops of blood to do like hundreds of tests. Like I've done it. It's like 8 tubes of blood, for like 100 tests. So there's no way you're going to do it with a few drops.
You can't, and it is. I mean, you're battling. You're battling entropy. You're battling statistics when you do that, and you kind of hit a point that a volume that you can't go below and rely on getting an accurate measure. But yeah, it was a fascinating story, the Theranos one. I'm looking forward to the movies when they come out.
Oh yeah. Well, very good. So what's the best way? Oh yeah, do people only have to live in the UK to get your service? If they live in the US, is it advantageous for them to do it, or is it just Europe that you service?
So US, we're not in. I certainly would love to see us develop a US based service. So we are in the United Kingdom. We do have some products that will be launching in the Republic of Ireland soon, and we're certainly interested in growing our presence globally.
Okay. And what's the best way for customers to get in touch and see what tests you have and what they can do?
The simplest way is visit www.medichecks.com, which is the address you gave out at the start. And we've got, so all of the tests that we provide are on there. That's probably the first place to start. The other thing we do, which many of our competitors don't, is we actually have humans at the end of a telephone line who you can call. Our customer service team are absolutely amazing. We get brilliant feedback about them on FIFO, which is a sort of independent feedback platform. So if they don't want to use the web browser, they can also call up and talk to someone at Medichecks.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Sam, it's been good to talk to you, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Great. Well, thanks very much for having me, Richard. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, Please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.